feel like it's really such a risk in that what if a Donovan Mitchell is looking at the rosters, everyone and their mama has heard that he may want to come home to New York, right? It's not a secret. But man, if I was him and the money's close or equal, and I think Cleveland could probably offer him more money, why would you want to leave a Cleveland to go to a Brooklyn Nets team that seems to be rebuilding?
Gets it off in time. And he's got it, baby! Big time Nets win!
The only Nets fans you know.
Man.
I mean, come on, man. Or are these guys?
Welcome back to the Only Net Fans You Know podcast. I'm Peter. This is episode number 76. I've got another Hall of Fame guest. Welcome to the show, NBA insider, Scoop B. What's going on, bro?
Man, I'm doing good. Thank you for having me. How are you?
I'm good. Just getting over the, Easter Sunday, just relaxing real good. And thank you for taking out your time for this. I know you're a busy man. You got a new show, No Nonsense with Tim Thomas. And man, I'm happy to see you winning out here.
Thank you. It's definitely the last 6-7 months have definitely been a lot of pivoting. But I'm glad I'm still here, and it shows that people still care what I have to say, and that's always a wonderful thing.
I'm going to jump just straight into it. Trade deadline, I don't think the fan base were too happy with. Dinwiddie for Schroeder. We had Royce O'Neal going to Phoenix for 3 second-rounders. I think the fan base really wanted a point guard to be brought in with a little bit more star power, maybe like a Murray from Atlanta. You had this one tweet that really made me think. Someone asked you, why does Sean Marks still have a job? Do you remember that tweet?
Oh, I remember that tweet, and someone asked me, why is Sean Marks still, employed by the Nets as the general manager? And I'm paraphrasing, but I remember the tweet. I said, basically, if Joe Tsai, the governor of the Nets, has a comfortability with Marks and Marks's pedigree having come from the Spurs system, and I said, as they say in the Black church, fame ain't fair. And and there have been people who have kind of revisited that or asked me any iteration or derivative of that, and I've always tried to speak glowingly of, or at least try to see both sides. And I can understand why Nets fans feel that way, specifically because since 2019, 2020, you've gone from Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, James Harden to Mikal Bridges. And, people are looking like, how did we get to this point? Of course, we had the pandemic, which dictated a lot of things. Kyrie and the jab, or not getting the jab, and him living in New Jersey and the Nets playing in New York, and how all of that comes about, and Harden ultimately wanting to leave and being traded to Philadelphia, and he's now a member of the Clippers, and then Durant ultimately, finding greener pastures in Phoenix. And people are looking like, well, what's going on? Now we've, gotten rid of Steve Nash, Jacques Vaughn, and Kevin Ollie is the interim head coach. And, if you talk to friends across the river in Manhattan, they want Mikal Bridges, but and some people think. I was on the Knicks podcast, and they were like, well, what if the Knicks offered the Nets 5 draft picks? Would Sean Marks answer the phone? I said, I think the Nets want to build around Mikal Bridges respectfully, but you go into this offseason, and now Nicholas Claxton is going to want the bag. And, then you look at what happens in Cleveland, how far the Cavs go, and did Donovan Mitchell, if the Cavs do well, does Donovan Mitchell stay, or does he look for Brooklyn or Manhattan? So I think the Nets fan base has seen a lot. I think, the Nets have always been blessed with good point guards or names, but they've never sealed the deal in winning a championship. And in 2019 or 2020, one of those years, the last few years, 2021, we were a Kyrie Irving ankle injury away from potentially, meaning because I have a history with the Nets going back. So, in my role, but the Nets were, an ankle injury away from potentially going to the finals. And, from then on, life, politics, COVID, health, and there's a myriad of other things just did not go in the Nets' favor. And, here we are.
Man, I think you just summed up my entire episode plan 100% in one sentence, in one little small paragraph. So I'm gonna dissect what you just said a little bit, all right? So I'm gonna take it back a couple years, like you said, with the big three. We know what happened. You don't have to comment on this. My personal thought being is when you have three Hall of Famers, really two, you could say at the start it was 7-Eleven came in, and you hire a coach who's never coached before. I happen to think that might be Sean March's biggest mistake. Joe Tsai, front office. Obviously, we're very frustrated, as were the fans, with how everything was going. And Kyrie Irving is about to be a free agent. Kyrie Irving winds up going off in that little spree. They wind up talking, Nets and him wind up talking about a possible extension. Obviously, it falls through. He gets traded to the Mavs. That starts the wheels turning of Kevin Durant getting traded to Phoenix. Do you think the Nets would take that back, seeing now where this path has taken them?
I mean, James and Kevin and Kyrie are still relevant in their respective markets.
Absolutely.
They weren't damaged goods. I just think I think Brooklyn itself was a distraction because it was about everything but basketball. You know, you made a point when you talked about the coaching portion of it, and you know, I've gone on record over the last 2.5 years, whether it was my role then at the time at Valley Sports or even my position at Spotify, where I discussed the fact that Ty Lue was Kevin Durant's wish for head coach. And, the conversation that Ty Lue had with Kevin, from what I've been told, was that I'm interested, but, speak with Kyrie about it and, have him reach out to me. And, if that's something he's interested in, I'll pursue it. And I'm not sure that Kyrie ever really responded. That's not something I've asked Kai, so I don't want to say he did it. I'll just say that that's not something he and I have talked about. Ultimately, Kyrie's choice was in Phil Handy, who was an assistant coach with the Los Angeles Lakers. And the Nets weren't interested on the front office side in bringing in Phil as a head coach. But I do know that the Nets were interested in bringing in Phil Handy as an assistant coach. And I know that ultimately the Lakers would not allow for him to interview for that position, which means basically they offered him they offered him more money to stay. I know that for a fact. And so Steve Nash was teammates with Sean Marks. I know that there have been people who have said that Nash was Kevin Durant's choice because of the relationship that they had when Nash was a consultant with the Warriors. And so a lot of people did run with that, but I ultimately know that Nash came highly recommended because of his role as a point guard and because of the point guard position is perceived as the quarterback of the team, the extension of the coach on the floor. That being said, I think post Kenny Atkinson, it seemed like a fresh start. And there were many people who believed that Nash coming in Brooklyn would be like it was like a process like Derek Fisher when he became a head coach of the Knicks, or when, Jason Kidd came into Brooklyn and, was the head coach there and then ultimately went to Milwaukee and then, had a stint with the Lakers as an assistant and is now, being successful in Dallas as the head coach of the Mavs. But I think the difference with all of those is I think Steve Nash had to manage the personalities that were Kai, Kevin, and then later James Harden. And I think that proved to be, I'll just say, very interesting. I don't want to throw anybody on the bus, but I do think that within the process of the Nets having, Nash as the head coach, you did have an influx of assistant coaches who will either or are future coaches. When you look at not just the fact that Ime Udoka left Brooklyn and went to Boston, now is the head coach of the Houston Rockets. You also had Mike D'Antoni, who was basically the offensive coordinator for Nash in in Brooklyn. And then he ultimately went to the Pelicans as a consultant in a similar but very different role. I know D'Antoni was actually a candidate for the head coaching position in Philly until Doc Rivers was let go in Los Angeles, and he became available. But I think there's just a lot of names that float around and a lot of different narratives that people convey, and that's their truth. I'll never say what's true and false. I just know who I spoke with, and I know that there were a lot of moving parts, both on the player side and the player empowerment era that we still are in, and there was a lot of moving parts on the front office side. And ultimately, it didn't work. I think for the Nets part of it with Nash, I think Nash lost his voice the summer leading up into last season, particularly when Kevin Durant, was threatening to one out, and Kyrie and his extension. And the issue there with Kyrie and his extension was, from everybody that I've spoken with, they were just, it was almost like and I got this from more on the player side than the front office side, but I was able to put a lot together later. It seemed like the Nets were pretty angry still about all the things that went on, whether it was Kyrie not getting the jab, and then also just a lot that came with the tweet with promoting the book or the documentary and more, and all of the backlash that came from the fan side, particularly, my Jewish brothers and sisters who felt slighted by all of that. And we don't have to relive it. He's moved on. The Nets have seemingly moved on from it. But ultimately, I just think that it was irreparable for a lot of reasons. And it for the fan base, I gather that they feel like the Nets took them for a ride, and they're stuck on the roller coaster at Six Flags waiting to see what other shoe drops.
Man, you just say so much that I want to talk about, and I'm so happy you brought up Mike D'Antoni, because there's a correction I do have to make. Sometimes I make educated guesses on this show. Sometimes I'm very right, and I'll be told that I'm right, and sometimes I'm told that I'm wrong. I've always felt the first shoe to drop before the big three started disintegrating was having Mike D'Antoni leave the team right before training camp in San Diego. Okay? This is right after the Bucks series. And all of a sudden, an older coach who doesn't have a ring, who just went and just saw what this team could do, and the feeling people have to keep in mind, the feeling was, man, we almost beat the Bucks that won the championship, and we were a shoe size away from making the Eastern Conference Finals. We run this back next year, we're good. We're ready. And he just left. And I always thought that maybe James Harden knew at that point that he wanted to go to Philly, and he went to the Pelicans just as a job. But I know I'm wrong with that. I do know that I'm wrong. But my theory now is that he didn't want to have to do all the work in Brooklyn. That's what I was told by someone close. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. That he didn't want to have to run the whole offense, and that he saw what was kind of happening as far as that. What do you think about that?
Well, the D'Antoni portion of it, I think. So I won't say whether you're right or you're wrong. I think there's truth in everything. You can find some truth in everything. But what I will say is, specifically to D'Antoni, anytime you are a new head coach or a coach, period, and this was told to me by other coaches, you're going to always bring somebody with you that you've been in the trenches with, because they know you, they know your family, they know your friends, and they can clean up your shit if you mess up. And so if you look at a lot of rosters with assistant coaches, a lot of times head coaches bring in guys that have either been college teammates, that have been, professional teammates, have been, they come from a background similar. Like you look at the Nets' current, coaching roster, like Kevin Ollie is the interim head coach, but coming from Jacques Vaughn's system, Jay Hernandez, who's an assistant coach, Jay Hernandez and Jacques Vaughn both were in Orlando under Vogel. And I can tell you that, with Jay, there was a point where had Jason Kidd not been named assistant coach in Vogel's staff, Jay Hernandez was being considered for that role. Wow. Because Orlando, those ties to Orlando go back to, them. Kevin Ollie was a different circumstance. I'm not exactly sure the whole tie-in with Ollie. Although I know that Detroit ultimately did want Ali, and things went south as far as contractually, and Monty Williams seemingly was a better fit from Weaver and more. But when you look at just the overall makeup of the Nets for Steve Nash, bringing in Mike D'Antoni was a no-brainer because he coached him and he had some of his best years in the NBA, meaning Steve Nash as a point guard in D'Antoni's system. You also brought in Amari Stoudemire as well, who will be my guest tomorrow on my platform over at Scoopy Radio. He was an assistant. He was a player development coach in Steve Nash's system, along with Tiago Splitter and a couple other people. Tiago Splitter and Ime Udoka came from the San Antonio system, which Sean Marks was a part of, and you saw that Udoka brought in Tiago as well as Royal Ivy. They all spent time in Brooklyn together, and Tiago comes from San Antonio with Udoka and more. But to me, D'Antoni coming in was really like him giving his blessing and kind of setting Steve Nash up. Who better to trust than the person who coached you? But I think also if you take a step back, prior to James Harden coming to Brooklyn, James Harden was the starting point guard for the Houston Rockets, and Mike D'Antoni was his head coach. And if you remember during that time in the bubble, they all left. Did you ever wonder why they left? Because the relationship with Daryl Morey had soured on all fronts. If you remember, everybody was leaving. And so at the time, D'Antoni was looking for a new coaching gig. The next year, D'Antoni thought that he was in the running for the Charlotte head coaching position. And I remember vividly, during that time, that was during the finals time where it was both D'Antoni as well as I just said his name, the Kenny Atkinson. Those two were the finalists for that position with Charlotte, and then Atkinson ultimately withdrew his name and he stayed in Golden State because the Warriors offered him more money. So that's why he stayed. D'Antoni was, even though he had a relationship with Kupchak during the Lakers years and more, kind of fell out of contention, and so you went with who you know in that situation. But I digress. Ultimately, D'Antoni was only staying in Brooklyn because he was passing the time until the next situation became available. The Pelicans situation is interesting because when Willie Green was hired, Willie Green and Ime Udoka were both hired that summer, the same summer, to take over teams. Willie Green with New Orleans and then Udoka with Boston. And when there's a thing now where when you get hired by teams, a lot of times organizations, if you're a new coach and have no prior experience, organizations want to control who you bring in, either because the front office wants to bring in some of their guys, or they just want somebody to monitor the situation for the front office or what have you. And so D'Antoni was ultimately brought in the following year. I believe it was how the math went. It was either that, however which way, D'Antoni was brought in because of his connection to the president of the Pelicans, who used to work with D'Antoni in Phoenix. So the relationship goes back to who you trust. David Griffin and Mike D'Antoni's relationship go many years back. Who do you bring in? The guy who can clean up your shit.
I see what you did there. Everything comes full circle. That's interesting.
Yeah.
See, that's different parts of the puzzle I didn't think about. So I thank you for enlightening me with that.
Of course.
So, I'm going to speed it up a little bit. 7-11 trades happen. Nets get swept by Philadelphia last year. This year, Ben Simmons, we think, is coming back healthy. Jacques Vaughn has an extension given to him, maybe like a week, or maybe I'm being a little, harsh with that. But pretty soon after being hired, he's given an extension. And I always thought, one, that was very fast. But people don't realize that if you have a coach that's just hired for the end of the year, a lot of the times the locker room does not respond well to that, because you have players that know that they're under contract next year and their coach isn't, right? So I kind of understand why Jacques Vaughn got an extension, but where I'm kind of befuddled, and there's lots to this, we don't have to go deep into it. I thought it was such a mistake that they did not give Udoka that job. I understand there's a lot to it, but a lot of people say, oh, Adam Silver had to tell the Nets this and that. People forget the NBA commissioner is hired by the owners. They get paid by the owners. So maybe the front office did say something. The NBA offices did say something. Well, what's your take on that? As much as you can say.
There was communication between the league office and the Nets, because around the time that Nash was let go was when all of the stuff with Kyrie Irving and the Hebrews to Negroes documentary that was tweeted and all that went with that. So there was a concern from folks that I've spoken with on the league side, as well as on the Nets side, that have intimated to me that, ultimately the Nets were asked to not bring any more attention to the situation. And there was a lot of moving parts with Boston, with Udoka's contract, and the people involved in that situation. And they've seemingly both Udoka and Boston moved past it, but it was a mess. And from what I do know just about the situation in Boston, I know that the Celtics had to move fast because of allegations and things that on the other person's side that there were threats being made, and ultimately the Celtics moved with it the way that they felt they needed to. But ultimately Udoka did not become the head coach, and I think Houston and Brooklyn, ironically, are both in very similar situations of rebuild. And I think you're seeing towards the end of this season how Houston is preparing for the future. And you're seeing how the Nets are still trying to figure out what they want to be. They need more draft picks, and they need some star power as well. And I'm not clearly sure the direction they're going based upon the roster currently constructed. But people that I have spoken with within the Nets organization have said to me that we have a young talent. We have young talent. They're growing. We have Cam Thomas. We have Mikal Bridges. Do we go out and make a move? I think they have the pieces to make that happen. And I would imagine that a DeJounte Murray, as well as, Donovan Mitchell are on their radar.
Man, like you're always getting a lot to dissect with this. We talked about DeJounte Murray before. If the price was really as Woj and I think Shams reported of being, I think a salary filler, aka could have been a Spencer Dinwiddie, and draft picks, maybe 2 first rounders or whatever. Why don't you think the Nets make the move then?
I think that if the Nets are smart, they pick up the phone and they have a conversation with both the Atlanta Hawks and the New York Knicks. I know that ultimately on the Knicks side of things, as I reported earlier this year, that the Knicks were open to conversations with teams on Julius Randle, and so they were open to teams offering different things. And I know that the Hawks and the Chicago Bulls were both teams that were discussed privately in certain situations. And so if I'm the Nets and I'm the Knicks and I'm the Hawks, I'm finding a way to make something like that happen, whether that's the Knicks, whether that's the Hawks, whether that's the Bulls. I know that, guys like Alex Caruso as well as DeMar DeRozan were topics of conversation within the Knicks organization. I also know that, DeJounte Murray was a person of interest there. And I also know that the Nets need some things, the Knicks need some things. And so I think a conversation and a 3-team deal with either the Bulls or the Hawks in conjunction with the Knicks or the Nets would make plausible sense.
Now, my next topic, I get a little passionate about. Okay, so excuse me if I go a little over the top with this. Obviously, we don't know where the Nets are going, or I don't know where the Nets are going. You probably don't know where the Nets are going. We're not them, right? Nick Claxton, 24 years old, going to be 25 next year. Defensive Player of the Year guy. All I heard for about 2 months before the deadline from 3 different people, one working in radio, a beat writer, and other people behind the scenes, tell me Claxton is probably going to be traded, probably out west. I know the teams, but I don't think I could say. But it's been people know the teams. I think if you do a quick Google search, you could see it. But but why? But why not trade him? And now I feel like the Nets are kind of held hostage because Claxton is unrestricted. He could just sign anywhere now. So now you got to give him the bag, right?
I mean, the Houston portion of it makes logical sense, particularly because of the connection to Royal Ivy in Houston, the connection to Tiago Splitter in Houston. As I mentioned before, their assistants under Udoka, and Udoka is there as well. So I think there's a connectivity there. But I also think there are other teams out there that he would offer viable services. I think, I think if we're looking at relationship and big picture, big money, I think I would have said a few months ago Dallas, but I think they kind of shored up that big man position by committee with both the iteration of Derek Lively and the guy that came from Washington, the big man there, Daniel Gafford. But when I look across the league, who's to say that he just has to go to a contender? Who's to say that he can't go to a Memphis? Or who's to say he doesn't go to other teams? If we're to go just off of relationship, who's to say he might not take less money? Hypothetically, I'm not saying this is a thing. Go to a Phoenix where he has a relationship with a KD or Utah Watanabe. Who's to say he doesn't go elsewhere? And I think Utah will ship to Memphis. But the point I'm making is ultimately, if you're going for money, you don't have to go to Houston. You could go somewhere else because you're not going to be the focal point of that team. That there's a lot of other pieces there. But at the same time, you look at how Oklahoma has built over the last couple of years, or Orlando has built over the last couple of years. They've done it with guys who want to be there, So, there will be teams. I think when you look at the offseason and you look at Orlando, I know that Klay Thompson is a guy that Orlando is very interested in, Miami as well. Who's to say that Claxton wouldn't go over there and, do something? So I think there's a lot of options there. I think ultimately it's important to finish the season and then, revisit those conversations.
It's fun. You're the second person that's mentioned Miami and Claxton to me. So it's very interesting that you said that. I know you're just spitballing and whatnot, but it's very interesting. Obviously, they have Bam there. I don't see a fit there, but like I said, I always heard out west.
Clay, but to me, I feel like Claxton, if we were to pick between a Miami or Orlando, he would fit better in an Orlando than he would in Miami at this point.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about Claxton. Mikal Bridges only has 2 years left on his deal, and then he's going to be a free agent. So it's very interesting to me when people say, like, the Nets want to build around him. And obviously, it's been wildly reported, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's the general consensus saying that we're going to build with this guy, build around this guy. We're going to bring a guy in. I feel like it's really such a risk in that what if a Donovan Mitchell is looking at the rosters, everyone and their mama has heard that he may want to come home to New York, right? It's not a secret. But, man, if I was him and the money's close or equal, and I think Cleveland could probably offer him more money, why would you want to leave a Cleveland to go to a Brooklyn Nets team that seems to be rebuilding?
Exposure, which turns into more money. Look at Carmelo Anthony leaving Denver and ultimately being in New York. He was in Dolan's Rolodex. And to this day is beloved. Now the risk you run is your number 15 is now worn by Jokic, and Denver has won a championship. But in the grand scheme of things, he'll never have to pay for a meal again in New York City.
No. Oh, absolutely. What do you think are the moves the Nets could make this year? Does a Claxton get re-signed? Do you let him walk? Do you try to make a deal for someone like a Murray, like you mentioned? Do you stay pat, get under the apron for 2 years in a row? They'd be under the apron if they stay under the apron this offseason. What do you think?
You go into the draft and you look to see what's available in the draft. You focus on getting Ben Simmons healthy and you trade him.
Do you think he's a Net at the end of next season? Just taking a guess.
Funny enough, I think both he and Julius Randle are very similar situations. It depends on surgery, healing, physical therapy, and what product they put on the floor. And so if you ask me that, you said this time next year?
Yeah.
The answer is no.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Okay. Obviously, the Nets don't have any draft picks. Could you see them trying to maybe buy a second rounder? First rounders are extremely pricey now with the new CBA. Could a second rounder be bought? Well, what do you think about that?
I mean, if you're going off speculation on what this year's draft is going to look like, some might argue would sit this one out and wait until next year. I still am of the theory that the Nets should look at their roster and see where they can get late first rounder, early second rounder. I think that the Nets should come into the draft not thinking about bringing anybody in by buying a pick, but if there's something available and it makes sense where they can get the salary cap under some and at the same time they can move some pieces that make sense, sure. I'm interested in to see what becomes of Dennis Schroeder this offseason because I think that as much as many have missed Kyrie, D'Angelo Russell, and more, he doesn't hurt you. But I also think that in the long term, the future of Cam Thomas and where he stands, I think, is going to be interesting. Also, I think that in a world where ain't shit funny, he's hilariously, when given the opportunity, put up strong numbers. And I think if you're the Nets, you're going to want to build around that. Both he and Mikal Bridges and a healthy Cam, the other Cam.
Yeah, Cam Johnson. Is Cam Thomas a point guard?
I think he's a ball player.
That's fair.
I think he draws a lot of double teams. I think he can kick it out to the open man. But I think he's a 2-3 that can distribute the rock when he needs to.
Yeah, he's played a lot better since Kevin Ollie's come in. I think he may have been the main benefactor of the Kevin Ollie ascension to head coach. We're going to start wrapping up. I got a couple kind of rapid fire questions to do, and then we'll get you on your way with some plugs. All right. I got to mention this. I did some research on you. I had to do some research. You've had an amazing life, my friend. And everyone sees that when you were younger in New Jersey, then you hosted a Nets program, Net Slam. I didn't even know this, that it was actually with Albert King, Fort Hamilton High School graduate, my alma mater. And what people don't know is how you got into that position, that you actually had to beat out, I think it was like hundreds of other people, hundreds of other kids at Chelsea Piers. But what was that like walking into that?
Yeah, so I hosted a show for 2 years called Net Slam and Planet with Albert King, Evan Roberts, who's now WFAN, and a woman by the name of Lynn Wilson, and Chris Carino, the voice of the Nets, and Amy Shear, both brought me in. They were both the executive producers of the show. And so essentially, I auditioned for a role that didn't have anything to do with the Nets. I was at my mom's friend, Alicia, she told my mother about a position where, or a radio station in Jersey City, New Jersey called Oswald Radio. And they were looking for kid personalities to work at the radio station to do, different things. It's local public access. And, we went over to Chelsea Pier, did the audition, and hundreds of kids were there. So then we went to the second audition, which was at Dangerfield's Comedy Club in Manhattan. And there were some other kids who made the next round. And, Oswald Radio called my family and, basically said we want Brandon to be one of the kids. And so we were doing like commercials with like the Crash Dummies and, some other local access things at the headquarters in Jersey City, New Jersey at Liberty Science Center. And around that same time, the Nets were rebranding, and they were rebranding. They had Keith Van Horn as the first pick in the draft their first round pick in the draft that year. They had Sam Cassell, Kendall Gill, Kerry Kittles, Jason Williams, and a myriad of other people that were on the team. John Calipari was the head coach and the vice president of basketball operations at the time. And, they were rebranding and they wanted to do a kids show. We had sponsors from like McKean Elios. We had a whole ad campaign with the Nets and Robert Wood Johnson where they said smoking is an offensive foul. It was a lot going on at the time. And here I am as a 12-year-old kid My first interview that I ever did was with Keith Van Horn. When he's walking with one daughter in a carriage and with his wife and another baby in tow. And, it was an awesome opportunity because not only was I interviewing players on the Nets, I was also connecting with players on the other side of the locker room, visiting locker room. So, I had conversations and relationships to this day with people like Reggie Miller, Dikembe Mutombo, Steve Smith, who's over at TNT now, Kobe, Shaq, Allen Iverson. I remember as a kid interviewing Rick Moranis from Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, but also seeing some of my media colleagues back then, like Adrian Wojnarowski, who at the time was at the Bergen Record covering the Nets. In addition to that, Chris Broussard, who at the time was at the New York Times covering the Nets and the Knicks, and even Stephen A. Smith, who was at the Philadelphia Inquirer at the time covering the 76ers, and you see what he's become. So, if they feel old, I definitely feel old too to be so young, but it gave me an early start.
You said a great story about Keith Van Horn and all that. Is there maybe a story you could tell? Maybe your favorite story, a net-centric story that you could say?
So growing up, I spent a lot of time in the Nets locker room. I remember at the time, Jason Williams, Sherman Douglas, Sam Cassell, Kendall Gill. I remember the locker room like it was yesterday. I remember going into the Nets locker room. So when you come in the arena, there's the media room, and I would just go to the Nets locker room, and there would be a guy standing at the door. You would let me through. I would hang up my coat in the locker room, and then I would go circle around the locker room. So when you go in the door, this large door, you go in. To your right is the coat rack. To your left is like a whole living room. It was like a couch. It was an exercise bike, TV. And then you go around, it was the trainer's office, and you would see stacks and stacks and stacks of just sneakers. And then there was another part of the locker room where there would be power bars. And I used to take power bars and put them in my book bag, and I would take them for snack at school the next day. And then you go in the locker room, there's a curtain in between the locker room and the area where the hangout area. And you go in the Nets locker room, and it's drawers of, so let's label socks, sweatbands, headbands, wristbands. You could just go in there and just take socks, sweatbands, and go about your business. So there's that. You turn this way to the left, and there's a whole, the shower area and the bathroom area. And I remember one time Jason Williams had seen me on an episode of NBA Inside Stuff. He was like, "Yo, I want the tape." I was like, "All right." So I brought the tape to him, and I go in the locker room, and I'm like, "Yo, Sherman." Talking to Sherman Douglas, "Yo, have you seen Jason?" He goes, "Yeah." Yo, Jason's in the back. He's taking the shit. And I was laughing because I'm 12, so it's you have a conversation with adults. And then so Jason comes out the locker room. "Yo, B, what's up? Yo, I got that tape for you." He shake my hand. His hand was hands. So stuff like that you remember as a kid, definitely.
Okay. Favorite Nets jersey?
Favorite Nets jersey. I have a few. I don't know that I have one. I obviously like the home white that started with Kendall Gill and Cassell and carried over to the Kid and even Darren Williams days in New Jersey. The plain white is cool. I like the Dr. J Long Island Nets era one. I don't know that. I think trying to find a way to bring the 97-98 jersey sequence to Brooklyn would be interesting. The gray ones that said New Jersey, I thought was cool during the Marbury era. That started with the Cassell and Kendall Gill era. I think those are cool. But I also do like the Derek Coleman, Petrovic, Kenny Anderson era, dark blue with the red Nets insignia. I like that. I also like the powder blue. I know the Nets brought that back briefly when Kai and Kevin and James were there. So I think I also like the Nets red. I thought that was interesting.
All right. Any plugs you want to throw out there?
Subscribe to the Scoopy Radio podcast on all streaming platforms. Also subscribe to my YouTube channel. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram, Scoop B. And make sure to check out No Nonsense with Tim Thomas and Scoopy. We've had 2 guests on, Stephon Marbury and Xavier McDaniel, both former Net and former Nick. Just keep it locked for everything moving. A lot of good things coming you guys' way. So thanks for the support.
Thanks, Scoop.
Amen.
This week's shout outs are Future Flavor 205, J from BK, EMOD6YR, and Warley on Wednesday. Subscribe, follow me on Twitter, like the episode, all that good stuff. Have a great day. Have a great night. Let's go Nets. We're out.